Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the virtual North America Smart Energy Week. As I'm sure many of you agree, I really wish we could have been together in person this year to learn from each other and connect face to face. It has been heartbreaking to see the intersecting crises that the city of New Orleans and the Gulf Coast region overall are facing. So before we dive into today's session, I want to ask each one of you to consider supporting the local community as it rebuilds from Hurricane Ida. We've provided suggestions of organizations on the ground that are doing amazing work. So please check them out at solarpowerinternational.com/ways to help and help us honor our commitment to the city and the people that call New Orleans home. I'm just going to come out and say this. There is no way we're going to meet our clean energy objectives or respond adequately to the climate crisis unless we meet the intensity of the changing climate with an equal intensity in policy development, innovation, private investment, and deployment. The urgency we are facing today is palatable. The cost of inaction will be in the tens of trillions of dollars, not to mention the human toll global warming is already inflicting. I say this not as an alarmist, but as someone who is trying to take a realistic view of both the business and personal implications. I care about this as a mother, and I care about this as a CEO. So today I'm announcing new and more ambitious goals for the Solar Plus decade. And not because loftier aspirations sound better, but because we need to get this done. I believe that if we get the policies right, we can achieve our goals and be global leaders in the battle against climate change. There's so much excitement for clean energy in America right now. It's easy to conceive of a strong solar future when your fuel is free and limitless and is the cheapest form of power in much of the country. When innovation is providing a new way to store energy and produce more power during more hours of the day, and when it can address historic inequality by creating jobs and economic opportunity to build a better future for millions of Americans. The last time we were all together in person in 2019 in Salt Lake City, I laid out SEIA's vision for the Solar Plus decade. At that time, we set a goal for solar to account for 20% of all electricity generation in the US by 2030. Well, that was 2 years ago, and I don't know about you, but it feels like a whole different world today. Since then, we've had a national election that completely changed the political dynamics and priorities. We've seen an increased and long overdue reckoning with racial justice and inequality that touch every corner of American life. There's been an onslaught of disastrous weather events, including Hurricane Ida, which toppled the grid in Louisiana and wrecked our plans of gathering in person. And that devastating storm happened as wildfires raged in the Sierra Nevada mountains and massive western water sources continued to run dry. And of course, I haven't even mentioned the global pandemic that has altered our way of life and continues to impact us, even as we gather here today. So it's against this backdrop, and in light of the vast potential of solar energy to help solve the planet's greatest threat, that today I'm announcing a new goal for solar energy to reach 30% of US electricity generation by 2030. With the right mix of policy action and private sector innovation, we can absolutely get there. Earlier this month, the Department of Energy released their Solar Futures Study, which lays out the blueprint for solar to account for 40% of generation by 2035, in line with President Biden's overall goal to fully decarbonize our power system. Our new 30% goal for the Solar Plus decade lines up well with these longer-term targets. But I believe it's important to lay down this earlier marker for one critical reason: speed. Back in 2019, I outlined a simple truth about our industry's growth. The growth of solar energy is inevitable, but the pace of that growth is not. That rate of growth is what will determine whether we successfully mitigate climate change and create economic opportunity for all. We know that the economics of clean energy are there, and the demand will only continue to grow. But when that happens is critical. The timing will make or break our ability to stay on the path that the scientific community tells us is necessary to avoid the worst impacts of the climate crisis. The next few years are critical. We need to deploy clean energy as fast as we can to bring down emissions and stay on track. This morning, we released a new 30 by 30 issue brief that outlines different pathways to reaching 30% of generation by 2030. This analysis shows that if we stay on a business as usual trajectory over the next 3 years, we can still technically catch up and reach our longer term goal of decarbonizing the electricity sector by 2035. But the cost of that delay would be steep. 417 million metric tons of additional CO2 emissions between 2022 and 2030. That's the equivalent of keeping 11 coal-fired power plants running throughout that 9-year period. And that is a cost that our planet and our people simply cannot afford. Acting quickly to address climate change isn't the only reason to ramp up our nation's deployment of solar and clean energy. If we keep up the pace and reach the levels of deployment needed to lower our carbon emissions, we'll create more than 800,000 new solar and storage jobs along the way and invest nearly $820 billion into our economy. Generating 30% of US electricity will turn solar energy into a $120 billion annual industry, 133% greater than where we would be under a business as usual scenario, and 350% more than we invested last year, a record year. But think about that in terms of your own business. How much of that massive annual market will you capture? And what will your company look like after our industry grows by a factor of 6? Growth at this scale also opens the door for innovation and entrepreneurship. If you've been on the sidelines thinking about getting into the clean energy sector, or if you've always wanted to start your own business, the opportunity is here. We won't reach our goals by doing things the same as they've always been done. We need new ideas and new ventures to push us forward. Whether you manufacture equipment, install solar and storage systems, provide financing or legal support, or countless other services, there is incredible potential for your business to thrive. But please make no mistake, public policy is critical. As we speak, Congress is debating the details of a combined infrastructure and budget package to invest in America's future. Some of the policies under consideration, including long-term extensions of clean energy tax credits, investments in workforce and development and training, and enhancement to our electricity infrastructure, would go a long way to ensuring we stay on track to hit our 30 by 30 goal. We cannot let this moment pass. That's why we're keeping the pressure on Congress to invest in America's clean energy future. If you've ever wondered whether you need to get involved in the political process, now is the time. So please join us at SEIA.org/infrastructure, writing or signing on to members of Congress, holding events, building support for solar energy in your community, and coming to Washington to help us lobby are all ways in which you can help. In fact, just last month, 748 companies signed on to a letter asking Congress to support our policy initiatives. This engagement is so important. Reaching our goal will mean deploying an average of 75 gigawatts per year over the next 8 years. And last year, we installed less than 20 gigawatts during our biggest year in our history. That kind of growth will require fundamental changes to our electricity system, our workforce, and our customer base. Today, we've invited a group of diverse experts to discuss a few of the most pressing issues that we need to tackle as we grow from under 4% of generation today to 30% by 2030. Radically increasing the amount of solar and clean energy we use to power our homes and businesses cannot be done in a technological vacuum. We're going to discuss the particular importance of short and long-term duration energy storage in achieving our vision. We also need to figure out the best pathways to add more than 800,000 jobs to our ranks over the next decade and ensure those jobs are available to Americans of all communities and backgrounds and support stable, long-term careers. And perhaps most importantly, we need to remain committed to centering equity in the energy transition and ensuring the clean energy economy benefits communities that have historically been left out and left behind. We've got a world-class panel to talk about all of these issues and more. But before we turn to that conversation, we invited a few public officials from here in Washington to share their perspective on the future of clean energy and what it means for the grid, the economy, and the American people.
Thanks for having me, and what an exciting time. The work you all do to expand clean energy is just so important, and it's so urgently needed. It's a priority of the Biden administration to support this clean energy transition as part of our effort to tackle the climate crisis, as well as a pillar of our economic recovery as we build back better. Because we can see from the wildfires, the heats, the droughts, the hurricanes that we've been battling, and we can hear from the scientists around the world that the climate crisis is a code red for humanity. But we also know that we have a historic opportunity, not just to reduce our emissions, but to create millions of good paying jobs, to revitalize our communities, to improve public health, and to advance environmental justice through this clean energy transition. So that's why President Biden set an ambitious goal of achieving 100% carbon pollution-free electricity by 2035. And I thank you all for helping to create the jobs and lead the innovation and do the work that is needed to get us to that goal so that we can deliver an inclusive, resilient, clean energy economy. Thanks very much.
Well, for too long, certain communities like communities of color, indigenous communities, tribal communities, poor communities have been on the front lines of dealing with polluters. Oftentimes we call them fence line communities. And these communities have had to deal with bad air, bad water, because they're right up against these companies or these entities that are polluting our environment. They know their solutions. They know what will fix their communities. But for too long, Washington's been dictating to them. It's important that we listen to what they have to say. And as we listen to what they have to say, we empower them and give them the tools to implement their own answers. And Washington gets out of the way. That's why it's so important that we take into consideration their views. The tool that we need is the Environmental Justice for All Act. That's a bill that Chairman Raul Grijalva of the Natural Resources Committee and I had the privilege of introducing. The bill would do three things. It would require that Washington actually consult with our EJ communities, these fence line communities, in order to make sure that we are in a position to help them implement their answers, their solutions. That's number one. The second thing it does is it incorporates a concept called cumulative impact. Cumulative impact is just a simple notion that, hey, before we cite a project into one of these EJ communities, we look at what that community has to deal with already when it comes to pollution. And if the burden's too high, we don't bring that industry in. We don't bring that new entity in. We keep it out to protect the community. And then finally, it gives EJ communities their own right of action under the Civil Rights Act to go to court and enforce their rights to clean air and clean water. They don't have to wait for some white knight. They don't have to wait for an attorney general's office to come in and save them. They can go directly to court themselves. President Biden's Justice 40 initiative is the answer to that question in my judgment. The notion of investing in these EJ communities at the front end to allow them to either learn new job skills or have opportunities to be entrepreneurs in this new green economy, that's the key. So that these folks are the tip of the spear of our new economy and not coming along as the caboose after all the money's been made, all the innovations happen, all the jobs have been taken. That's the way to help these communities and green our economy at the same time.
Hi, I'm Rich Glick, Chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Whether you work in the clean energy industry or work in the government tackling the energy issues of the day, we are all very fortunate to be doing so during this very exciting time as the nation transitions to the clean energy future. When it comes to the future of the electric grid, all you have to do is look at the interconnection queues where more than 90% of the projects are either solar, wind, or solar or wind plus storage. In large part, demand is coming from consumers, big and small, which is driving the move towards solar and other renewable resources. But it is also great technological innovations that has dramatically driven down the cost of solar and wind power and enabled storage to become the game changer by providing flexibility needed to address concerns about variability, brought about by significant increases in intermittent resources. As storage expands and we learn more about its capabilities and applications, we need to keep an open mind and not try to cram storage into one of those boxes that we think about today, such as traditional market services. We will likely learn more as we move forward, and we may have to make adjustments along the way. One of FERC's top responsibilities is to eliminate discriminatory regulatory barriers to new technologies. Over the last several years, the Commission has issued major rulemakings focusing on ensuring that energy storage and distributed energy resources, including behind-the-meter storage, can participate in wholesale markets. But our work isn't done. For instance, we are looking at both interconnection policies and market rules to determine whether action is necessary to facilitate greater participation of hybrid projects, primarily solar and storage. More generally, ensuring that market rules keep up with the pace of the transition, especially ensuring that rules properly recognize the market values of new technologies, will likely be something that is a constant work in progress for this Commission. So I look forward to the discussion today and on the energy storage opportunity, and look forward to continue working with you all on the many exciting issues we will be spending our time on in the days ahead. Thank you very much for allowing me to make these opening remarks.
So good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm incredibly excited to be joined here by such an illustrative group of experts. It was good to hear those messages from folks. I wish we were all on the same stage, but hopefully soon. So I want to just start with an introduction to each of our speakers today. And I've asked them to actually introduce themselves and share those parts of their experience that are most relevant to them, to this conversation. But kind of given what's happened, we last gathered together in Salt Lake City in 2019 as a community. The world has changed a lot. There's been national elections, a global pandemic, increasing natural disasters, a reckoning with racial equity issues. What does the world look like from your perspective? What's the role of clean energy? And how has it changed since we were all together in 2019? So I know that's a really big question, and I framed it as a little introductory, but I'm going to hand it over and ask each one of you to answer that. So George, you're the chairperson of my board, so I'm going to ask you to go first, and then we'll go around the room.
Well, sure. Well, thanks, Abby, and thank you everybody for joining us. It is too bad that we're doing this again virtually, and I never want to get used to this. I think that we're getting good at it, but I don't want to get used to it. We're much better when we can get together as a community, and it is pretty remarkable how things have changed over the last couple of years from the last time we were able to get together. As Abby mentioned, I am the board chair of SEIA. Currently, have had my tenure over this entire kind of change in the industry, but I'm also the president of Swinnerton Renewable Energy, which is the largest solar contractor in the country. So we've been able to see this through a really unique lens in the fact that we employ about 4,000 people across the country. We work in 20 plus states. Building projects as well as managing, working assets in the utility solar space. And we've been able to, really see how working through a pandemic, working through a change in, administration, a change in outlook on renewables really impacts companies that, hire thousands of people yearly, if not daily. And we see how renewables can be such a great opportunity. And so we're excited about all of these plans. I love every time I hear Gina talk about how excited she is about what this industry can do as a job creator and as an industry. And so, we'll talk more about that going forward, but thank you for having me, and this will be a great conversation.
Great, George, thank you. Ajulo, I wonder if you'd like to go next.
Sure, be happy to. My name is Ajulo Otho, and I'm the founder and CEO of Inner Wealth Solutions. I'm engaged in a variety of different roles within the renewables industry. solar in particular. In addition to running a small development company, I also serve as general counsel for Carolina Solar Services, which is a operations and maintenance company with 0.5 gigawatt of assets under management. We operate in the Northwest and the Southeastern United States, and I serve on a variety of nonprofit boards, including as chair of Black Owners of Solar Services, which is an emerging trade association of African American veteran business owners and aspiring entrepreneurs in the renewables industry. And I am also very hopeful about our future. I envision a future that is teeming with a marketplace of all sorts of businesses and products and impacts. And I also envision a future where the lines between producers and consumers is blurred over time. I look forward to our conversation.
Great. Thank you so much. Dr. Mostafa Santiago Ali, I wonder if you would like to go next.
Well, thank you, Abby. It's wonderful to be here with everyone. I am Dr. Mostafa Santiago Ali, Vice President at the National Wildlife Federation, Chief of Programs at the Union of Concerned Scientists, and also founder of Revitalization Strategies. And we're at an amazing moment in history where we actually get to frame out the direction that we're headed in. You know, we have some choices to make. You know, we can continue down the road with failed policies that left gaps, that left vulnerable communities in dire straits and our planet heating up. Or we can move toward a North Star. That North Star is actually focused on justice. It is focused on a new set of opportunities that the clean economy provides each and every one of us. You know, one where we lower impacts, health impacts in vulnerable communities, one where we create a set of amazing jobs that can be transformational for families and build generational wealth and can bring hope back into many areas. And one that also helps to save the planet, something we should all be focused on. So I'm excited about this moment. I know Congressman Keechan, a good friend, and the amazing work that folks are doing on Capitol Hill to give us the framework that's going to be necessary. And of course, my old boss, Gina McCarthy, is going to do everything that she can to help us. But it's going to take each and every one of us. And that's why I'm so excited about the conversation that we're going to have today.
Thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, Kelly Spivakman.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Abby, and thank you all for inviting me to join this important conversation. I'm Kelly Spivakman, and I'm the Acting Assistant Secretary and the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office at the Department of Energy. And with that, I think I'm out of time. No, I'm just kidding. So you asked sort of what's changed over the last 2 years, and clearly the most obvious is that we have a change of leadership. The American people chose a different direction, and President Biden has made his climate strategy really clear that the US is aiming to achieve a carbon-free power grid by 2035 and a clean energy economy for all Americans with net zero emissions not later than 2050. These are really bold targets, and he established really the most ambitious climate strategy that the US has ever seen. And as my fellow panelists mentioned, this is not a moment too soon. The recent United Nations climate report really made it clear that low carbon is not enough. We have to establish net zero emissions. And at DOE, we took that to heart. And specifically within EERE, our strategy really is to take a look at the sectors, decarbonizing each of the major sectors of our economy that are contributors to the nation's greenhouse gas profile. So that's decarbonizing the grid, transportation, industrial sector, US buildings, and the agriculture sector. We're setting these measurable targets so that we can make sure that we're setting ourselves on an irreversible path to meet our climate goals and to stay paced with decarbonizing the whole of economy for all Americans by 2050.
Great. Thank you all so much. What I hear consistent throughout all four of you is this sense of both hope and opportunity, but also urgency. And so I want to talk a little bit about that urgency and kind of the pace of change and what we need to set ourselves on that path. And Kelly, I'm going to go back to you first. It was not magic why you were last, because now you're going to be first. As you know, because I'm sure were one of the principal authors, the Department of Energy just released the Solar Futures Study, which is a blueprint for how we're going to get there. I mean, I think we all agree numbers and goals are lovely, but it's the execution that really matters. Can you just talk a little bit about kind of what that study tells us, and particularly about how different technologies need to work together? We're going to talk about how different people need to work together in a moment, but also the technologies, right? And specifically storage, because I think so many of our companies are really trying to figure out what that interplay looks like.
Yeah, appreciate the question. And yeah, it was pretty exciting to see the results and then issue the results of the Solar Future Study. It found basically that in order to decarbonize the grid, the role of solar energy would need to grow from supplying about 3% of the US electricity system to 40% by 2035. So if we think about that grid decarbonization by 2035, we got to 40, maybe 45%. There are other elements that need to be a part of that. And by 2050, the models suggest that decarbonizing the whole system could result actually in really significant increases in demand for solar, up to about 3,000 gigawatts of energy. So to achieve this level of deployment, the industry's really got to install at an average of about 30 gigawatts a year between now and 2025 to ramp up to the 60 gigawatt a year from 2025 to 2030. This is, you mentioned people, this is really going to create, just in solar, about 1.5 million new jobs without raising the projected 2035 electricity prices. So it could save it could save homeowners and energy users about $1 trillion in avoided climate change damages over the next 3 decades. And we all know that we're being pushed to do more. Now, as we integrate more renewable energy into the grid, while ensuring it's reliable and secure and resilient, we know that we need to accelerate the deployment of existing resources. We need to scale up wind and solar, and that draws us to storage. We need to we need to increase the amount of storage that's on the grid to help us to integrate all the various technologies that are available to us today, and also to bring in some of those newer technologies that Department of Energy is working on with respect to hydrogen, which has a role in storage, and other technologies. It's going to be pretty awesome, ensuring that transmission and storage and clean, firm power is available wherever and whenever it's needed, ensuring that we have the generation and the demand and the storage technologies that are needed to integrate all these renewables onto the grid is not a small feat. And that's why I'm also really glad to be here with so many folks talking about the people that are going to be needed to bring this to bear.
Great. No, thank you for that important piece of work. It was an exciting moment, but even more importantly, an exciting blueprint for what the future could look like. And Dr. Ali, I want to build on what you said earlier, right? You talked about we have this moment in time to really craft the future and not simply watch it unfold as passive bystanders. And your audience today are hundreds of people that own and work in the clean energy industry. And I'm curious, as you think about how we go about crafting that vision and that future, what sort of advice would you have for those business owners and also for individuals that are just listening who may want to enter into this part, right? Entrepreneurship is such a critical piece of this transition. I wonder if you can share some thoughts about that.
I would start off by saying there has to be intentionality, right? Intentionality will actually get you to the goals, and will make sure that you have an inclusive process. And it will make sure that all voices are actually being honored. And that will mean that there will be new voices and new sets of ownership opportunities and benefits that will come from that. We also have to make sure that we're taking a holistic approach to what's going on. Why is it that clean energy is so important, especially to vulnerable communities? We know that in our country at this particular moment, over 200,000 people die prematurely from air pollution in our country every year. And we know disproportionately that African American and Latinx and Indigenous brothers and sisters are the ones who are losing their lives. We also know we got over 24 million people who suffer from asthma, 7 million kids. And again, we know who are the ones that are going to the emergency rooms and the ones, again, who are losing their lives. So if we understand and begin to connect the dots of why this transition, a just transition, is so incredibly important, then it helps us to anchor ourselves to the dedication, to the sets of resources. And the immediacy of the moment then becomes something that we understand in a much deeper fashion. We also got to understand, I remember when I was a small child, my father was an engineer and he gave me a solar kit when I was a kid. That opened up my mind to a new set of opportunities. We also know that all the folks who are in the clean energy space are going to have to partner and are going to have to better invest in HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. They're going to have to invest in Hispanic serving institutions and tribal colleges, because there are a number of great minds that are there, but you got to go deeper into all the various STEAM programs, not just STEM, but STEAM, because we need the arts to be a part of it also. All of this gives us an opportunity to be transformational in this moment. Yes, it will help us to mitigate many of the impacts that are happening from the climate crisis, but it also gives us a chance to actually build stronger foundations underneath of communities. And as I close, let me just also highlight for folks that we also have to get engaged on the policy sets of conversations, because we understand the negative aspects that have happened in policy development over the years that have created sacrifice zones, that have created these frontline communities that are dealing with all these different impacts. But we also understand that when we get engaged and do policy right, that we can cause a number of really positive things to happen as well. So we have this moment, and I'll leave this last point. When we talk about the clean economy, something that I am a huge supporter of, and I know other panelists will go deeper onto this point. When you look at wind and solar and thermal and tidal, and whether you're talking about blue or green hydrogen, we can go into that conversation as well, that less than 2% of those businesses are owned by African American and Latinx brothers and sisters and Indigenous brothers and sisters. So if we're truly going to have this transformational economy, we got to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to fully participate as owners and as workers. And then we got to make sure that the right things are in place for workers, that make sure that you fully have not just a job, but a career that will last for generations upon generations.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that introduction. I'm going to ask Ajulo perhaps to offer some insight into that, right? You and some of your colleagues have formed a transformational organization in the past year, and I think folks would be interested in hearing about BOSS and kind of how you're trying to build upon what Dr. Ali is talking about, right? Creating that entrepreneurial and wealth opportunity. And then George, will get to you as one of the largest employers of folks in the country.
Sure. First, I'll just start by saying that in the renewable space, that this industry, like any other industrial transformation, information before it, technology, manufacturing, in our case, energy, is experiencing a lot of growth. And that's the hopeful part. We're at an inflection point where I think with the right set of public policies in place, we can really grow. And the fact that private industry is also very focused on this same set of questions leads me to think that we're at a very hopeful point. We also, as an industry, though, are at an inflection point in terms of transforming the way that consumers and producers participate in the economy. And just as Dr. Ali said before, we have to be intentional about that process. As members of BOSS, we, like others in the field, are creating sustainable and hopefully profitable businesses focused on the environment. And I'm excited about a lot of the new business lines and ways of thinking about how to operate a business that are emerging as a part of this process. So we're seeing things like creative vegetation management practices, considerations around agrivoltaics, environmental justice, renewable energy credits, social recs. different applications of community solar, ideas around creating additionality related to rural development and community development, this emphasis on low and moderate income households. We're seeing cooperative business structures and employee ownership business structures start to emerge. And all of that is tied to the production of electricity. And those innovations are also looking at creating a diverse workforce that is working with a living wage, some unionized, and expanding opportunities for Black and Brown businesses and small businesses of all types in the field. So these are examples of how our industry is not just transforming how we consume electricity, but also transforming the economy at large. But I think there are certain points of caution and pitfalls that we should be mindful of as we transform. The first, Dr. Ali mentioned before around intentionality, measurement is critical. We do what we measure. And all of our companies have some form of KPI, key performance indicators, that we use to drive our businesses. And so I think it's critical for all of the companies in this industry to begin to embed KPIs around diversity and equity, around environmental justice. Secondly, Black businesses and minority businesses are like any other business, but they're not all alike. And so think about how we're approaching these companies. Don't always assume that the relationship will be an asymmetrical relationship. Consider that mentorship and training are a great approach, but not always the best approach. But all of these businesses, though, are looking for sustainable, if not profitable, ways of building their businesses. So start from that perspective and begin with the business opportunity in mind when we're starting to have conversations with these businesses. And then the last piece that I'll say about our industry in general, I think we need to be cautious about this sort of roll up, bigger is better mentality. In many ways, that's kind of what got us into this mess with the huge gap around opportunity and equity in our society. It's also what got us into this mess around the climate crisis in general, just thinking that we've got to drive towards bigger is better. And so enormous private equity investors and centralized plants in some ways have a little bit in common. Compared to an environment that may be teeming with smaller businesses and distributed scale solar. Both are necessary, but I see value in the diversity of those applications, of those types. And so, for instance, smaller distributed scale sites that may be 5 or 10 megawatts or less need to be understood as having as much value as 100 and 200 or 300 megawatt sites. And beyond that, especially when we think about some of the justifiable pressures from ranchers and producers, agricultural producers in these rural communities, and when we consider the challenges around interconnection. These smaller sites are facilitated by storage applications as well as demand management tools that are coming online. And so they can be added at great value to the mix of generation. But the good news is that we're really just getting started. And let's begin with that end in mind around sustainability. Sustainability of our natural and our built environment, as well as the sustainability of the social ties and connections that we need in our society.
Julio, thank you. And I think both you and Dr. Ali offered really important North Stars, right? Justice and sustainability in a variety of contexts. And I definitely want to get back to your point about the different ways in which innovation is not simply technological innovation, but sometimes process and application and human innovation as well. But George, I want to turn to you as we think about, Kelly talked about adding 800,000 plus workers. So we have a workforce of over 1 million. I'm guessing there will be a diversity of business models, but some of them will be at large companies like yours. And as you think about what that transition looks like, you have had experience ramping up, and I know being very intentional about your workforce. What do you see as both the opportunities and perhaps some of the challenges of the workforce development piece as we look at this teeming future?
Well, I think I love to talk about the job aspect of this industry, right? And starting our business from really employee of one to now 1,000 people full time and thousands of people across the country working for our company. We've seen, what job creation really looks like. And so when we talk about moving to 1 million jobs, we know that a lot of those will be folks that we interact with every day. And while, we specialize and understand where our, swim lane is in the larger utility scale solar, I fully appreciate that this is an industry that that needs to do it all, right? We need to do distributed solar. We've done a lot of distributed solar in our past, and that's where we started. And we just found where our unique skill set was. But we think and believe, and I believe, and why I'm been such a part of SEIA for so many years, is that I believe that we have to do, this industry has to touch all areas, right? We have to do distributed. There's a huge opportunity in community solar and distributed storage. This is, that we're never going to get to these numbers with one industry or the other, right? In utility scale and not distributed, we all have to be working together. And I recognize that companies like ours need to partner with small and local businesses and give opportunity where we can bring resources, but need companies to help support our growth. And so, I'm proud of the fact that, we have 85 to 90% local hire on every project that we do, right? So we bring a very small footprint into these rural communities and we hire locally, and we want to build industries, right? So we're excited now that we're seeing these kind of solar hubs starting to create in many areas of the country. And I always used to only could point to the Central Valley of California, where we've been working for 10 years. And, people that say, construction jobs are temporary jobs, I can tell you that those folks that are working on solar plants, that have been building solar plants for us for 10 years, don't think that those are temporary jobs. And so we're seeing that happen all over the country now, which is exciting, right? So we're doing it in West Texas, we're doing it in Illinois, we're doing it in the Mid-Atlantic. There are these industries that are being created around our industry, and that is what is so exciting, right? It's a full force multiplier of jobs that can be created in this industry. And so, we all need to work together, though. I think that's the message to kind of everybody listening today, is that the only way that we achieve the kind of numbers that Kelly talked about is if we all do it together, right? We partner at every level, and we go out into the communities, and we find the local business owners, and we create the opportunity to build those businesses together, right? This is not going to be done by big companies like us, right? We're not going to do this on our own. We need support, and we need to bring the resources and partner with the right groups so that we can deliver on this promise, right? There is a great opportunity here, but we have to do it together. We have to have conversations like this. We have to be open to where we can provide resources, and we have to also be understanding that we can't do it all. And, the companies need each other. And so partnering is such a big part of this, and there's such a huge opportunity for it, right? If we're really going to build this kind of economy and create 1 million+ jobs in this industry, we have to do it together.
That's awesome. It's good to hear. And it's one of the things I love about SEIA as an organization in particular, and I know I'm very biased, is that we do represent sort of companies of all sizes, business models of all different varieties, distributed solar, community solar, industrial solar, utility scale solar, as well as all the storage models as well, in addition. So sort of the diversity in all of its forms is an ethos we embrace. But Kelly, I want to get back to you. And as I think about kind of how things work together, right? And and your puppy. I'm thinking about Chairman Glick's words about storage and how storage has to work together and how we have to solve some of these real challenges to ensure that there is this rapid deployment. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what DOE is doing to help facilitate that kind of work on the interplay between storage and solar.
I mean, I'd love to, but I would also, and sorry about the puppy.
It's so cute.
It's locked out. I do want to just comment and just underscore the importance of what Ojulo and Mostafa were also saying. We get that too, and this is part of why I'm so excited to be a part of this administration. With initiatives like President Biden's Justice 40 initiative, where 40% of the overall benefits have to go to disadvantaged communities, and how we execute on that in the work that we're doing is so just as important as getting more solar and storage and wind and geothermal and hydrogen out on the grid. So we're doing so much work in making sure that we implement principles of energy justice throughout our project life cycles and from the very beginning of how we think about what we're trying to do when we initially research something, all the way through how we're deploying. And I just wanted to say I'm so proud to be a part of this panel, because this is such an important part, that not just all working together with respect to the normal players that play, but bringing in a broader set of stakeholders like the HBCUs and other minority serving institutions. So I don't want to spend too much time, because you did have a direct question, but it's also why I'm just really proud of the last week's announcement that we had with Communities Lead program, the Local Energy Action Plan pilot, where we're engaging communities where they are to find out and how to support them with technical assistance for their own energy and economic development goals. And just, I can't underscore enough how important that is, and how we feel responsible to be a part of this inclusion effort. So,
well, and also sort of to Julo's point about creating metrics to measure it, right?
Absolutely.
We can say 40%, but how are we going to know 40% unless there's clear metrics and KPIs? And I know the whole administration is working on that.
We are working hard across a whole of government to make sure we have consistent metrics as well, so that when we're putting out our funding announcements and other funding mechanisms, people know easily how to report in what their diversity plans are, and they have the metrics around it that we can all relate to and speak the same language, because I think that's an issue. And less acronyms too, I think, would be helpful. Anyway, you did ask me very specifically about the energy storage work, and oh my gosh, I'm sure no one in this audience will be surprised to hear me say how excited I am to be a part of the energy storage element of what we're doing to try to decarbonize the grid. Back in December 2020, and throughout all of 2020, really, DOE worked on the Energy Storage Grand Challenge roadmap, which is the department's first ever comprehensive energy storage strategy. And that roadmap that we issued in December of 2020 encompasses the electrochemical, the mechanical, the thermal storage, flexible generation, flexible buildings, and power electronics, way beyond the reference battery storage, but it includes hydrogen, which I don't like to color code. I just want to have clean hydrogen, but that's also applicable to the grid. this roadmap that we issued back in December had 5 tracks, because we know that it's not just about technology, but of course, the technology development track is an important part of that. But it's also the manufacturing and the supply chain track to figure out what are the technologies, the approaches, and the strategies for US manufacturing that are going to build upon that job creation and support and strengthen US leadership and innovation. The third track is the technology transition track, where we're going to work with more of the emerging domestic markets, the emerging technologies, really to create bankable business model development and disseminate really good market data for, especially for new technologies that are beyond batteries. And the last one is one of my favorites, the policy and valuation track, which is going to help provide data and tools and analysis to appropriately value energy storage for the flexibility in markets, both restructured as well as the vertically integrated markets, and provide for capacity and resilience and all the great work that FERC has done over the last several years with FERC 841, and I'll add to that FERC 2222 or FERC 2x4, which addresses the distributed storage efforts. So there's just a ton of stuff that we have already begun, and then we added to that just this summer, where we're looking at, as we decarbonize the grid, we're going to need longer duration storage to help support even more solar and wind and other technologies on the grid. And so we launched the long duration energy storage shot, storage Earthshot, which the goal of that, similar to the Sunshot we did 10 years ago, really is to target the reduction of cost of grid scale energy storage. We're looking to reduce that storage cost by 90% for systems that are delivering 10 or more hours of duration within the next decade. So by 2030, we want to have a commercially viable long duration solution for the time that by 2030, we're going to have a really good level of intermittent resources like solar and wind on the grid, and we need to be able to make sure that we're supporting that so that the grid is more, the grid continues to be resilient and reliable.
Thank you. I feel better knowing that you're in charge of figuring that all out.
It's a complicated Rubik's Cube, but it's so important, and we're doing everything we can to work across all of Department of Energy for these issues and across all of government. So I think it's in the spirit of what you all are talking about bringing more stakeholders in and making sure that we're all considering upfront the various perspectives that need to be taken in, both from a people perspective and a technology. So Office of Electricity and Office of Nuclear, which happens to be a carbon-free resource, making sure that we're figuring out this grid Rubik's Cube with all the technologies that we have in hand and bringing along as many people as we can.
Excellent. And it is not your fault, but Order 841 and 222 by FERC is like such an energy wonky statement. It's horrible. We got to work on that.
I tend to get that way. I'm sorry.
It's all right. So kind of building on this theme, right, of sort of diverse resources and diverse people and intentionality, Dr. Ali, I was struck by your statement sort of at the end about policy and how, we can do all these things, but policy really does matter. And we need to be really thoughtful about the kinds of policies. Obviously, Congressman McKeeshan talked about Justice 40, Kelly did as well. I wonder if you could offer your thoughts and sort of what are some of those best practices in policy as a lobbying organization, sort of what kinds of advice would you have for us on what we really should be focused on to help keep our eye on that North Star?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that's so broad. And Kelly brought up some excellent points. I used to lead the interagency working group. So they had 17 federal agencies, a couple White House offices. So once again, we have to have comprehensive strategies, even though each agency and department has its own charge and mission. When we can make sure, as I often say, the intentionality and sets of actions from a comprehensive strategy, it's going to help us to actually be better. And, we talk about build back better. So a part of the foundation is making sure that we're better on the federal side. When we talk about contracting and subcontracting opportunities, and the president early on in his administration made sure he had an executive order to begin to move forward on addressing some of the disparities that exist in that space. So whether we're talking about folks who are on the private industry side or others, realizing that we have to do better on that supply chain. So sometimes we just talk about the greening of the supply chain. That's incredibly important. But we also got to make sure that there's fairness and equity that's a part of that supply chain. And that means that we're going to have to make some investments. We're going to have to make sure that there's additional educational opportunities. You bring people into the conversation like the Small Business Administration, who can play a role in helping folks who are getting up and beginning to move forward. There is an opportunity for us to make sure that we have, the all of government approach to have real meaning that's in there. The other thing that we have to do is to make sure that all of our actions are not having additional impacts in vulnerable communities. We have important sets of conversations that are going on around battery storage, which is incredibly important and will help us to hit many of the goals that are necessary. But we got to make sure, and thankfully, there are a lot of folks who are focused on the recycling of the parts and pieces that are in that mix. And then we also got to have really serious conversations on the policy side, also around minerals and precious minerals and how they play a role in our new clean economy. And what are the mining practices that we'll make sure that are in place to make sure that as we're still having some types of extractive actions, that we're getting better and smarter. And that we're making sure that, folks who have had to carry the burden are no longer carrying that burden. So when you ask me that question, it is a broad set of policy actions that give us an opportunity to make sure that our organizations, to make sure that our government are 21st century, because we saw what 20th and 19th century sets of actions have done. And sometimes it wasn't because folks were trying to do the wrong thing. Some of it was technology wasn't yet there. Some of it was science wasn't there yet. Now, as my grandmother says, when you know better, do better. We have an opportunity to make sure that our policy is better, that it's inclusive, and that it meets the needs of everyone, and that their voices are helping to frame that out. I appreciate what the Department of Energy is doing. I know Kelly is on it, and she's going to push. You got folks like Shalonda Baker, who is also going to make sure that our energy processes actually are reflective of what the needs are in communities. We're going to make sure that energy democracy becomes real. And for those folks who might not know what energy democracy is, look it up, because it looks a lot like the democracy that our country is supposed to be built on. And you got folks like Tony Reams, who's also there now with you at the Department of Energy. These are folks who get it, right? They understand policy in the larger context, but they also can anchor it in the realities that are going on the ground. And that's the type of policy that we need. When Mrs. Ramirez looks at policy, when Mr. Johnson or Mr. O'Leary looks at it, they see themselves reflected in the change. They feel connected to it. And let me explain to you in the last 10 seconds why that's important. Because we know when we're having these spirited conversations and discussions on Capitol Hill and in state houses, you need to have an informed group of people, everyday folks who are getting up and going to work, who also say, you know what, I need to be a part of this. And here are the reasons why. It helps to change dynamics in my community. It helps to make sure that my kids are protected. It brings all these other things in. And that is what policy is supposed to look like. It's supposed to be reflective of everyday people's needs.
I feel inspired. Thank you. Thank you. Julio, you talked about some innovative policies and sort of some of that democratization of policy in some of the examples you held up around, different kinds of land management or agricultural management. I wonder if you could just share from your perspective, you talked about a couple different roles you have, like what are the most exciting areas of policy? What do you see as the biggest opportunities for growth in the coming years?
Yeah, and before I go too far, I definitely want to pause and just say we're really grateful at BOSS for the partnership with SEIA. SEIA is a foundational supporter or sponsor of BOSS, one of the first entities to ever step up and do that. And so we're super grateful for that partnership with SEIA. I am excited about most of the innovation that's happening, quite honestly, outside of the public policy realm. Working in places in the Southeast, in North Carolina in particular, I know how challenging it is at the state and municipal level to look like states and counties in other parts of the country where policy is more enabling. And so I'm excited about the innovation that's taking place, status quo. And a lot of that is happening from the private sector. And particularly around some of the interests, not only in sourcing load from renewable sources, but also looking for additionality on top of that electric procurement. And so the space around the renewable energy credits market, the sort of voluntary way in which businesses are thinking about how my investment in a rural community can yield additional benefits or impacts for the people in those communities. Those are the things that excite me about the industry the most. And it seems that there's more and more of that happening, more announcements around that kind of work. So that's the thing that excites me the most right now.
That's great. Yeah, I know it is an exciting time with all of that innovation in all forms. And I appreciate, we are so glad to be partnered with you. And I appreciate what you said about it is a partnership of equals and peers and friends, which has been a really nice development. George, I know the time is getting close to the end, but I wanted to ask you, you talked a lot earlier about kind of what I interpreted as a lot of your self-directed intentionality, right? Like, as a business person that it makes economic sense and business sense to partner with folks in the local communities. But as you think about the role of smart policy, as Dr. Ali was talking about, and Kelly is trying to execute, as we think about building that workforce and workforce development, what is the role of policy? Are there things the government can be doing to help companies like you and like Ajulo's to build workforce development and build entrepreneurship?
Yeah, and I think one of the kind of key tenets that we're seeing in a lot of this infrastructure bill is around apprenticeship and job creation, right? And so, how do we work with Department of Labor, and how do we work with local states to really build an infrastructure for apprenticeship in renewables, right? It just doesn't exist today. And I think there's great opportunity to partner with companies like ours that have, a lot of resources and have the ability to build these kind of in-house apprenticeship programs, so that we can partner with community colleges and partner with small businesses, so that we can give those opportunities, so that we can really train the workforce of tomorrow, right, to create this industry opportunity. I think is something that I'm really interested in, right? Is that we've looked at, this is wonderful that we're moving this business to a kind of a prevailing wage structure, right? So that we have a good, high-paying job creation, but we also need to train the workforce of tomorrow. And so we need to be able to act on that policy and be able to work with state and local governments and Department of Labor, really to build a structure that is scalable, because it's just the infrastructure in place for those type of training opportunities don't exist today to support the business opportunities of tomorrow. We can't bring in enough apprenticeship programs to create 1 million new jobs in this industry unless private companies get engaged in building that infrastructure and partner with local, state and local governments to do. So I think it's a huge opportunity. I think it's something that we have to do together, right? There's just absolutely no way to do it. So, but I think it sets up a framework that incentivizes companies to do it. And now we have to just get the support in place to be able to create it. So I think the training and apprenticeship programs are something from a policy standpoint that I'm excited about, but also know that it's going to take a lot of work for a lot of companies working together to put it in place.
Great. I'm glad. Thanks for raising that point. That's such an important piece of this puzzle, is to make sure that we have that partnership. Well, it's a little hard to believe, but we have come to the end of our time together. I think there were a lot of themes that emerged, but so what I'm going to take away from this, and what I hope our audience takes away, is that this is an incredibly pivotal time, and we have an amazing opportunity to build and craft and direct this industry of the future. But we need to do that with intentionality and inclusiveness, and with our North Star being carbon reduction, justice, and sustainability. So to my esteemed panelists, thank you so much for spending some time with us. The moment we can gather in person, I will host you all here in my office in Washington, and I really look forward to the continued partnership over the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Abby.